the gender hipster. Do you remember the 90s? I certainly don't. Seeing as the 90s constitutes a rather large part of my life, completely erased from my memory, I think it's time that I reminded myself. But how? Well, what better way than with a movie? And it just so happens that I've managed to find just the very film. It's absolutely bursting with gender fuckery, and it's also the most 90s thing ever. This is Virtual Sexuality. Virtual Sexuality tells the tale of a world justifiably forgotten. It's just about the silliest teen movie in existence, for one. Our main character is Justine, a hip and happening 90s girl who laments the fact that at 17 she's far too old to still be a virgin.
I'm a 17-year-old virgin.
17 and still a virgin. Truly a more terrible fate has never befallen anyone. Ah yes, the world's most inexpertly played violin is being sawn away at, just for you. Justine and her best friend Fran go about their days shopping, talking about boys, shopping, trying to attract attention of said boys, talking about their oversexed classmate, who was the sort of girl who was allegedly considered attractive in the 90s, and doing other feminine things. It's just as well this isn't set 10 years later, or they'd be taking mirror shots for their MySpace pages. Desperate to divert herself from her boy troubles, Justine decides one day to visit a virtual reality arcade with her nerdy friend Chaz. Now let us all take a moment to remember when society thought that virtual reality was going to be a thing. Those were the days. The polygonal, poorly textured days. Justine finds a VR makeover machine and creates her ideal man, who seems to be directly inspired by Roy Batty from Blade Runner. If she's that interested in blonde, artificially created cyborgs, she really should just contact the Tyrell Corporation directly and order one. Suddenly, there's a stupid electrical plot point, and the virtual reality arcade explodes. And out of the rubble comes Roy Batty, the boy band member, who suddenly has been made flesh and now has all of Justine's memories.
Chaz, it's me! Justine!
What have you done with her, you bastard?
It is me, Justine! I went into a machine.
Help! Help!
Chaz, listen! I'm Justine Alice Parker. I live at 58 Zealand Road. Little sister Lucy, mum Marion, dad David. My best friend's Fran, Johnny Depp, dream date. I've got 18 pairs of knickers, 14 pairs of shoes, not including trainers. We went to Chisenhale Primary School together. You do a paper round, which, by the way, is a very sad thing for a 17-year-old to do. And your mum used to send you to primary with a brown rice and tofu lunchbox. Enough?
What machine?
Roy Batty adjusts to his life as a male relatively well, only asking a few confused questions before getting his head around the whole "I suddenly exist and now I have a giant penis" thing. Also, Chaz's parents seem completely okay with the fact that their son wants a random man to live in his room. Because this is the 90s, the decade that sense forgot.
Oh, and I just say, hey, Mum, I want this guy who dresses like Bjorg on acid and has serious gender problems to snuggle down in my top bunk.
Do you, dear?
Oh, hello, Mrs. Lovett. I'm, Jake.
Do you support Arsenal?
Just to prove how nonsensical the 90s really were, many of the issues in this movie revolve around the fact that Roy Batty is experiencing a comically large erection for the first time, rather than the fact that legally he doesn't exist. But that's not even the most confusing thing about virtual sexuality. Midway through the movie, we find out that Justine didn't turn into Roy Batty at all. No, Justine was apparently here all along, just going about her business, and she never even thought to contact Chaz to find out whether he'd survived the arcade explosion or anything. Maybe she just got temporary amnesia and forgot she'd ever been there. Logically, Justine should have body swapped with Roy, meaning that she'd be going around with a completely blank-minded personality of a virtual reality creation. But logic doesn't apply here when there are more important things to worry about. Like the fact that Justine still hasn't been laid. Anyway, Justine decides to sleep with this gross Chad Kroger dude, but everyone manages to stop her. Meanwhile, these vaguely evil 90s scientists want to perform experiments on Roy Batty, because he's the first replicant that gains self-awareness and emotions or something, and the Tyrell Corporation wants to find out exactly how this happened. But before they have an opportunity to perform the void conf test, Justine rescues Roy with her terrible driving.
Why does he keep doing this?
It's okay. Okay, start again.
Chekhov's lack of skill. Roy Batty then tells her that he essentially isn't real, and they need to use some 90s computer hacking VR bullshit to cause both of them to come to one person again. I've seen things you people wouldn't believe. Penises growing to comically large sizes on a dance floor. I've watched pound coins glitter in my hand after wiping a windshield clear. All those moments will be lost, like tears in rain. Time to die. Chaz deletes Roy Batty, blah blah, who cares, whatever, the end. But there's just one question echoing in the viewer's mind. What about Justine's virginity? Well, don't worry, she lost it to Chaz off screen. Yes, the fact that he lost his anorak means that he was now more of an ideal catch than greasy Chad Kroger, even though he was always a nice-looking, friendly guy, but what the hell do I know? Anoraks were probably the 90s equivalent of a chastity belt or something. Now, just in case you couldn't already tell, this movie is very silly. But unlike most of the silly movies I review, it's surprisingly inoffensive. There's a minimum of terrible gay jokes, Roy Batty doesn't act like a giggling princess, and all the teenagers, while consistently shallow-minded, are shallow in a harmless sort of way. But replicants, harmless fun, and stereotypical 90s nerds aside, how did virtual sexuality portray the internal logic of gender fuckery? Not very well. If Boy Meets Girl was the pinnacle of realism in the body swap genre, then virtual sexuality is right the way at the other end of the spectrum. Roy Batty is at first a little disoriented about his new gender, but he adjusts relatively quickly and with very little incident.
How do guys cross their legs?
They don't much.
It's weird stuff, all that. Tackle, isn't it?
The social and legal implications are also very quickly skimmed over. Although Chaz is alarmed with Roy's appearance at first, it doesn't take much to convince Chaz that Roy is Justine's personality in another body. The most unrealistic reactions, however, are those of Chaz's parents, who not only seem unrealistically delighted by their son's potential homosexuality, but they barely ask who Roy is or where he came from, and are completely fine with Roy moving into Chaz's room.
His new friend spends an awful long time in the bathroom.
So, he's a bloke who takes care of his appearance. Just because he likes a bubble bath or two doesn't make him...
I couldn't borrow a hairdryer, could I?
Of course.
Chaz and Justine's peers also don't seem at all bothered by Roy's sudden appearance, even though they've never seen him before, and it's not as if he's even enrolled in the same school as them. The one concession to Roy's status as a non-person is the fact that he gets a job as a window washer, since he lacks any of the identification paperwork necessary for him to get a completely legal job. So Chaz doesn't take long to adjust, Roy himself has no problems, and society doesn't care. Is there any conflict in this movie at all? Or does all of the drama come from the fact that Justine hasn't had sex yet, even though being a virgin at 17 isn't exactly the most uncommon thing in the world or anything? There is actually a little confusion in the film, and it's to do with the fact that Roy isn't sure what gender he's attracted to. Does this mean that Justine is bisexual, or is Roy into both genders because he's a virtual construct and, much like a sim, both options are equally possible? Who knows? Who cares? The filmmaker certainly didn't. So that was Virtual Sexuality, a true time capsule of the silly preoccupations of mid-90s Britain, but also completely harmless fun. The gender swap plot isn't very intelligent, but it isn't really in any way offensive either. The only way Virtual Sexuality is in any way notable is how outstandingly it captures the blind, naive optimism of the 90s, a time when anything was possible, when society didn't cower in fear of terrorism and change, but instead dreamed about the exciting possibilities of everything garishly, ridiculously considered cool. When women began to be as sex-positive as men, and when gender swap began to be treated as something a little more nuanced than just one constant transphobic joke. If you're in any way nostalgic about the 90s, I'd give this movie a watch. If you're in any way unfamiliar with the quaintly ridiculous ideas of the future they had in the 90s, I'd give this movie a watch as well. And if you ever wanted to see a giant cartoon bonus sprawling in someone's pants, well, Virtual Sexuality. And if you'll excuse me, it's a little bit cold and rainy here. I think I'm off to buy myself an anorak.
Replicants are like any other machine. They're either a benefit or a hazard. If they're a benefit, it's not my problem.
May I ask you a personal question?
Sure.
Have you ever retired a human by mistake?